Day two of free agency is wrapped up, and the Winnipeg Jets have mostly kept the depth signings. It doesn't really forecast a big championship season, but that might not be the worst thing.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have wrapped up day two of free agency, and for the most part, it does appear that the Jets might now be done. I think that there could be something else coming down the road, not necessarily in free agency, but maybe a trade or something. Otherwise, though, it does kind of seem like the Jets have, by and large, made their moves. And looking at free agency and what the Jets have done, I've got a working theory that Winnipeg might not think this season is going to be the best ever. Based on how, the free agency period, the pre-period, and the current period have gone, some of the moves that happened before the Jets could even sign guys, and some of the teams that have outbid them on other players, it kind of seems like things have taken a bit of a different turn, and that the Jets themselves may actually be pivoting in what they want to do this summer. Now, there are a couple of ways to interpret this. Maybe Winnipeg thinks that they can still buy at the trade deadline and make themselves a contender if everything breaks right. Or maybe the Jets think, you know what, this season might not be that great. That's okay. The 2026 draft, if ever there was a year to perhaps lose out a little bit in the interim to make a bigger splash later, this could be the year to do it. And of course, that's all before Kyle Connor makes one of the most consequential decisions in franchise history. Will he re-up, or will he look at what the Jets are doing right now and feel like he's not quite committed to the plan? Let's chat about all of that in tonight's episode, starting off with who Winnipeg brought in today in free agency. So the Jets, for the most part, have spent a lot of this period really going for depth players. I would not be shocked if they were in for guys like Brock Besser and Andrew Mangiapane. The rumor was that Mangiapane may have actually been offered a bit more cash than he got with the Oilers, but that for him it was about chasing a cup ring. So understandable if he goes there. Obviously, he gets to play alongside the likes of Draisaitl and McDavid, which, to be fair, if you are looking to parlay that into a bigger contract afterwards, I could understand why he'd want to go there rather than maybe trying to go to the Jets, who are kind of in a bit of a transition stage, right? Winnipeg obviously just won the President's Trophy, but oftentimes when you do that, you see the teams that win them take a bit of a step back the year after. And I think the Jets are kind of in line to do that. I don't really feel bad about that either. I think that taking a step back isn't the worst thing. But looking at the free agent signings, the Jets made official today the Kale Clague signing that was supposed to happen yesterday. They also brought in a goalie, Isaac Poulter, and then a couple of forwards. They brought in Walker Dewar and Samuel Fajimo, and then they also signed Gustav Nyquist. Now, most of these contracts are league minimum, and I would say that almost all of them are for the Moose. The only one that is not is for Nyquist. Nyquist was signed for $3.25 million for a year. He is very clearly brought in to probably be the Ehlers replacement, or at worst, if you're looking at maybe the depth, maybe the Appleton replacement. Mason Appleton has signed with the Detroit Red Wings for just under $3 million for 2 seasons. Nyquist coming in to replace either him or Ehlers. Either way, doesn't really change things in my opinion. I just think that the Jets are looking to bring in some warm bodies, and they have done so. Now, when you look at this free agency period, I actually really love it for the Moose. Manitoba is going to be a lot more watchable than it was in previous years. And while that doesn't really sound like a strong endorsement, I actually feel like the Moose being much better this year is a really important step for helping to insulate and shelter and really help raise your prospects, right? The AHL is not a development league in the traditional sense, but it is a place where you want to teach young kids good pro habits. And I think that this is a much better way to, not really put them in the dumps all the time. Manitoba being so bad last year probably couldn't have been good for the mental health of all the guys on that team. And I think players like Lambert really thrive on confidence. So if they don't have that and they don't feel like the team is doing well, that just can't be a healthy environment for anyone. So good on the Jets for really fixing up the Moose. They have brought in some big AHL blue liners. They have brought in one of the top AHL scorers in Fajimo. This is a fantastic acquisition if you want to make your AHL team a true force to be reckoned with. So great stuff. Unfortunately, that doesn't really translate to the NHL club so much. Winnipeg kind of brought in some depth forwards, and I think what I'm kind of seeing from the Jets so far is that they don't really feel super committed to this group this year. Not that they're trying to tank or anything, but I think if you look at the amount of one-year contracts that they've been handing out, the fact that a lot of them are low dollar amounts, and that they're not really spending a ton on big free agents, it kind of feels like the Jets are taking a year and maybe pushing it off a little bit. You know, the free agent market this year was not good. The trade market has kind of dried up a bit. You know, a lot of the teams have already taken their biggest swings. And so what's left for Winnipeg to go for really isn't that impressive. If this is how the Jets are reading it, this may not be the worst outcome. You know, I think the Jets having all the cap flexibility and roster flexibility after this upcoming season is so much more preferable to getting locked into a big Brock Besser. I know a lot of you are probably upset about the Besser thing. I actually think it was a minor blessing. The less that the Jets get tied up in bad money that could age poorly really quickly, I think the better off they'll be in the long term. It does mean that there is some pain that's going to happen, but inevitably, good things can come out of it if the Jets play their cards right. They also have done themselves a good favor of leaving enough cap space to where if the Jets, this roster, this squad actually does well, they can still buy at the trade deadline. There's nothing holding them back from doing that. So you have a really interesting decision tree. And a little bit later, I want to talk about whether this season's going to be a punt year or if the Jets are likely to be a playoff contender and whether they should really cash their chips in. I've got a couple of different ways to really approach this, and my own personal preference is this year should be a punt year. I think if there was ever a year where you take a step back and maybe have to sell some assets, this might be the best time to do it. And I know that's really tough to say for a President's Trophy team, but you have to think about the long term and what a big draft acquisition could really do for this franchise that's, quite frankly, looking for the next big thing to come in and replace a guy like Ehlers and really just upgrade the talent tree of this team. Winnipeg has tons of depth all around. They have done a great job of going into the margins and adding around there. Now it's time to really start to figure out how you raise the overall ceiling of the squad. So a lot of exciting stuff there. But I think if you're looking at this free agency period, I can understand why a lot of people are disappointed. I myself have kind of been looking at it from the lens initially that the Jets were very serious about competing. And I don't think that these free agency signings really do that. I don't think that there's any needle movement so much as there is making sure that the floor is, you know, at least somewhat respectable. This team is definitely a lot older and slower than it was last year. I think based on some of the opening night lines, we could be seeing a very rough team this year. You look at the forward groups, you look at the talent that's there, it's not. There's a lot of solid forechecking ability. This team could be okay, but I have a feeling that we are likely in for a bit of a down season. And I want to chat about what that could mean for the Jets' present and future and how all of this might impact the whole Kyle Connor situation that is going to be a big talking point for the remainder of summer. We'll dive into the upcoming season in just a sec. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal general manager giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Maybe not the same thing as managing a roster, but you know what? It's a lot like managing your finances. Monarch Money, of course, is more than just a budgeting app, too. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. In addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. You know, if you're thinking about all the expenditures that you have in a monthly period, whether it's streaming services and stuff, it can be easy to lose track of things that might be costing you more money than you need to spend. Monarch can help manage those and make sure that you are not putting yourself in the red more often than not. And if you've got a partner or spouse, you can also share your finances with a shared account that keeps everyone on the same page and takes all the stress out of financial management. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for rejoining us at tonight's show as we are chatting a little bit about free agency, what has transpired for the Jets. And I wanted to say, before I even go into the potential lineups and what I think is going to happen this year, this is, agnostic of any sort of trades that the Jets may make. I honestly think that Winnipeg is not likely to make a big acquisition unless someone really clearly comes into view that they can honestly make a real play at, that they're pretty sure will be committed to the Jets, and that's willing to come to Winnipeg. If that doesn't really open up and that requires a lot of things to happen, I don't think Winnipeg's really going to be super active in the trade market. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from this team. Let's talk about why. So, as of right now, Connor Habjack from Sports Talk Winnipeg put together what he thought an opening night lineup could be. And you're looking at, your usual Connor Scheifele-Velarde, then Perfetti, Taves, Nyquist, Niederreiter, Nemesnikov, and Iafallo, and then maybe like Kepka, Barron, and Pearson with, of course, Lowry on IR. And then, the defense is probably the same, JMO and DeMello, Sandberg, Pionk, and then whoever the heck is going to play on the third pairing. I have no clue. That's a total guess, right? But I think if you look at the forward lines, what do you notice? Pretty clearly, not a lot of scoring prowess. This team has a real talent deficiency that kind of harkens back to the Jets of like the pre-first playoff run. You remember back then, Winnipeg used to have a lot of forechecking talent, not a lot of offensive skill. And as of right now, this roster does not have much in the way of scoring prowess. Even with Lowry back, this team is going to have not a lot going for it, in terms of elite finishing talent. And I think if you're looking at this team, I look at the signings that the Jets have made this summer so far, and they don't scream to me that the Jets feel very confident in this season. My gut is that, they looked at what happened with the emerging market. They saw a lot of teams overpaying and kind of felt like you'd have to give at least 4.5 plus to some of these mid-tier free agents. And they're like, we could do that, or we could just give a Pearson type or someone a mil for a year, ride it out, see what happens. If you are in touching distance of the playoffs, maybe you think about trying to push for it, but you're not really obligated to. If you kind of feel like this season isn't going to be the best, and you could actually turn some of these one-year contracts into maybe a couple of draft futures or even some middle six talent, maybe this is the better way to do it. If ever there was a year where I think the Jets would be rewarded for having a down season, it's this one. And look, here's the thing, right? There will be financial ramifications, but I think having a Taves in your lineup does something to soften some of that. The narrative is going to still be there for a while. You're going to have the shine of the big, the hometown hero coming back. It's going to sell tickets. It'll sell jerseys. And so there is some insulation against potential ticket revenue loss. But I just think the Jets are kind of in a position where they really can't win with this. I think, they've realized the free agent market was not good. The trade market doesn't seem like there's much that's going to be available that the Jets can either afford or that's really worth going for. And so this might be a better season to not really rush into things and to just sort of play it out, see what happens. And if things really go south, you have a very good chance at a solid to even great prospect in this year's draft. If the Jets enter the top half of the first round, which I think is more likely than people may realize, I don't think that's a really bad thing. The Jets, quite frankly, aren't a team that makes really big trades and they don't go aggressive on the market. So how else do you bring in big names? If you don't sign them in free agency, which you shouldn't do to begin with, then the only way that you can do this is through the draft. And the draft could be one of the best we've seen in some years. Now, listen, right? We're not really going to be in Gavin McKenna territory unless the Jets manage to somehow miraculously win the lottery ball and everything just completely changes. But it doesn't have to be McKenna or bust. I think the Jets are going to have a really good shot at a number of top-end prospects. And if you do draft a really good one, not only could you build, your core around a player like that, you could also trade that prospect for immediate help and really speed up your retool. this Jets team is in a really decent spot of having a lot of flexibility. Now, this is the really optimistic take, and I think this is the one that I feel Winnipeg may be setting itself up for. I think the Jets have kind of felt like this is not really the plan that they had in mind, and I doubt that this is really, their true intention. But either way, whatever it's likely to be, whether it's intentional or not, the Jets have given themselves a decent backup plan if things really go sideways. If everything works out and the Jets somehow get themselves in a really good playoff spot, you have what, maybe 5 or 6 million once you factor in the Gabe and the Neil Pionk signings. Not Neil Pionk. Sorry, the Velarde and Sandberg signings. I said Neil Pionk because Sandberg is pretty intimately tied into that pairing. But Dylan and Gabe both will command probably in the neighborhood of 12 to 13 million total. So you have about 5 or 6 million to play with. Not a lot, but at the trade deadline, with all the cap accrual that you could have, that could be a very decent space to work with. If, again, things don't work, you only have a couple of guys who have a lot of term, and the rest you could potentially part out to bring in some immediate help for the future. So I feel like this is probably a good spot for the Jets to be in. They really can kind of toe the line for a lot of the season, and I do think that this team's going to take a step back. They're slower. I think the quality of the roster has gone down, and I'm not real mad about it. Now, if the Jets were serious about trying to contend and win the cup, I would feel very differently. And that's kind of why I've sort of approached this offseason initially with some skepticism and frustration, because the Jets have really talked about doing everything it takes to win. And so far, the free agents that they've brought in don't really do that. They might raise your floor a little bit, but not by much. And so if Winnipeg is more kind of thinking in the back of their minds that this could be a year that you sort of soft tank and not do it directly, but, just be prepared for it, right? I don't hate that. In fact, I would be pretty on board with getting ready for the 2026 draft class. Now, again, this is absent of any trades, and stuff really could change if a big top 6 player comes in. If that happens, you suddenly need to repivot and change how you run the rest of this offseason. But given the amount of cap space the Jets have left and what we're kind of looking at, I don't think that they're going to be swinging for anyone in particular. If they do happen to make someone happen, awesome. But I just don't think that there's a lot out there unless you maybe go to Pittsburgh and have a conversation for Raquel or something. Not much out there is going to be super attractive, and you might end up overpaying by a lot for a guy who really doesn't move your needle. So for the Jets, this is a very interesting position. I don't remember the last time that we had a season where it kind of felt like maybe the Jets were thinking a little more punt. And I know that they would never say this, and it's probably not even their direct intention because, obviously Hellebuck and Scheifele really want to win. And you have the whole Connor situation sort of sitting over all of this. KFC, he is out of contract after the season, and extension does not appear to be imminent as far as we know. Last we heard, they had maybe had some initial conversations, but nothing that appears to be on the verge of being announced right now. So that's a very interesting place to be. And for the Jets, it means that they have almost unlimited freedom to do whatever it is that they want. And that could be a good thing. That could be a bad thing. But I think if you're the Jets, given how this free agency period has gone, this is probably the best spot you could be in. Set yourself up for all the options that you want when you have the start to the season. If things really don't work coming out of the gate, you've got players you can call up and young prospects who might be able to fill in. You can move plenty of these contracts and probably get real assets back, and it might pan out really nicely ahead of one of the best drafts that we have ever seen. So curious to know how you feel about this. Are you down with the idea of maybe punting this season and sort of retooling on the fly and sort of maybe doing a Dallas Stars kind of rebuild? I think the Jets have a really good opportunity to restructure how this core is arranged, and they could do it very fast. That's the thing that I would say is my optimistic view. I think it would require other things for the front office to change, and Chevy himself would have to do things that we've never really seen from him before. And so, this is maybe a little overly optimistic from me, but I do feel like there's a great opportunity here to restructure this Jets squad. And a lot of it could really change if Kyle Connor decides he does not want to re-sign with the Jets. I want to chat about what his decision will be and what, the impacts either way are going to be on a franchise that, quite frankly, loves and adores this guy. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting a little bit about, the offseason so far. And if you frame it from the idea that the Jets are trying to be playoff competitive, you are probably feeling pretty disappointed. And that's kind of how I was for the past, couple of days. But if you think about this more as the Jets essentially not committing to a particularly big year and are instead preparing for the following season, then it starts to feel a lot more optimistic. There's real opportunity for growth here, and the Jets might be able to retool on the fly and reconstruct their top nine to be something truly special. Now, amidst all of that, one of the biggest pieces of this team and really of this current core is up for renewal after the season. Kyle Connor is going to have one of the biggest contracts in Jets history if he chooses to sign it. And that's one of the bigger ifs. I don't think that it's actually a lock. KFC has been around this franchise for many years, right? He's a fan favorite. The city idolizes him. Everyone talks about him as one of the most underrated skaters in the league, and he has built a true reputation. But I also look at his career and where it's gone and where the Jets have gone, and I wonder what his thinking is. Does he feel like this Jets team is his home? Does he feel like he wants to continue here? We're seeing a lot of, former Jets like Kopp and, just now Appleton moving to Michigan. Teams outside of here would absolutely foam at the mouth if they found out that there was even a chance Kyle Connor might be on the move. And so it sets up a fascinating decision for both Connor and the Jets. If Connor is committed to the Jets and wants to re-sign, then I think an 8-year deal is pretty much a locked certainty, right? And I actually would say that this is the most likely thing anyways. I have a really hard time imagining the Jets not wanting to ink this deal. You just lost Steelers. You have one of your best goal scorers in franchise history eligible for extension. I don't think that the Jets have any intention of letting him go. The only reason that Kyle Connor would leave the Jets is if he decided he wants to leave. And if that's the case, your whole season and offseason completely change. And I don't know that it's necessarily a thing that people should be terrified of. The thing with this is we've all seen how Chevy operates when somebody wants to leave. Winnipeg does a really good job getting out of these situations. Look at what happened with the Dubois trade. Winnipeg won super huge in that respect. And I think if you do the Kyle Connor trade, the return that you would get for one of the most highly respected and highly touted players in the entire league would be insane. Kyle Connor would probably get you a couple of major roster players who are on the younger side that could really restructure how Winnipeg's middle and top six work. Not that you want to do this necessarily, but again, if KFC decides he doesn't want to sign, that is a very potential reality, and it would honestly give the Jets some really good balance. I think right now Winnipeg's scoring talent is kind of on one line, which is not ideal. But if you were to have to trade Connor because he feels like the experiment is over, I think you could really win that trade in a way that we've never seen the Jets win before. They've already won many of these other force outs, which is, the kind of a Chevy hallmark. But the Kyle Connor trade could bring in a return that would be an absolute king's ransom, especially if it comes with an extension. So, the Jets have really a world of options here, and it all comes down to what Connor decides. For what it's worth, I don't think anyone out there imagines him going anywhere else, and he hasn't really said he's upset either. He seems to be thrilled to be a Jet. As far as anyone knows, he wants to stay here. So I would expect, the $12 million deal to be inked pretty soon. But if things don't work out and maybe the Jets and Connor are further apart than we realize, you have a very interesting decision to make. If Connor goes, it kind of triggers a mini rebuild. I already was talking about this year maybe being a bit of a retooling season, but if you lose Connor, you are rebuilding basically your whole group. Because at that point, you basically just got Lowry, Morrissey, Sandberg, Scheifele, and of course, maybe Velarde, and who else? Well, Hellebuck, of course. But that's not really that many pieces when you really start to think about how much you would need to bring in. So this is a fascinating decision point for the franchise. It could really change how everything happens from this season on. And I'm very curious to know how Connor feels about the team. If he feels like he would be better served going elsewhere in free agency, for one thing, he can name what he wants in free agency, right? It would be kind of like the Marner deal. He would get a king's ransom in free agency. He could maybe even push, beyond 12 million, right? If he really felt like it, he could probably ask for more, especially since the cap is likely to go up even further by the time he actually hits free agency. So this is a very interesting place for the Jets to be in. I will say I'm slightly nervous about how it all pans out. I think that for all the opportunity that there is a lot of risk if things can't get resolved by the start of the season. If you don't have a decision from KFC by game one, I would be very nervous about what happens for the remainder of the season. I really don't think that you want to go to the end of summer not knowing what Kyle's plans are. And I don't think that he'll force that situation either. I think Kyle will 100% resign. I have no inkling that he doesn't. But if he doesn't, man, this Jets team is going to be going through some real changes in ways that we've never seen before. So buckle up for the next few weeks. I think we're going to be in for a crazy ride with this summer. I think there's going to be not a lot that happens in terms of remaining signings, but I think the moves that do happen are going to tell us what the Jets think about this upcoming season. And if the Jets still feel like they can swing a trade, don't, wait for Chevy to surprise us. Keep an eye out for something because, I think everyone knows that this Jets team might even be in danger of missing the playoffs. This feels different than last year, where I thought they might miss the playoffs because they're going with a younger group. This group is a lot older, a lot more veteran, a lot slower, and compared to the rest of the Central, generally improving. I think Winnipeg is not necessarily throwing in the towel, but maybe admitting and preparing themselves for a reality where they're not in the top of the Central. So fascinating season upcoming. I'm actually kind of excited because this feels like a great, you know, Pandora's box of opportunity. Things could go really badly, but they could also go really well in Winnipeg's favor. And when the Jets have had their backs up against the wall, sometimes they have produced some real diamonds. The pressure can forge one, and I'm hoping the Jets have something special in store for all of us. But again, give me your thoughts on the offseason so far. Are you happy about it? Are you frustrated? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, though, I appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for supporting us during this offseason. We will see you back here tomorrow, so have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.